gray, cold, bleak bits of land in a cold, wind-blown sea. And it was from there in November, now 50 years ago, that a huge Japanese armada with 6 big aircraft carriers started for Hawaii to destroy the American fleet anchored at Pearl Harbor. The attack came at 7:55 a.m., Sunday, December 7th, 1941, and it changed the whole course of our century. If you stand on the shores of Pearl Harbor today, in the lovely early morning light of Hawaii, you can almost see and hear the first waves of Japanese planes, dive bombers, coming in from the north. The first desperate message went out at 7:58. Air raid, Pearl Harbor. This is no drill. All of us who are old enough remember exactly where we were when we heard the news. My older brother had taken me to my first concert at Syria Mosque in Pittsburgh. I was 8 years old, and I remember nothing about the concert, only the excitement in the streets when we came out. But why had the Japanese attacked? What were the events, what were the misconceptions on both sides that led to that terrible morning? World War II was far and away the greatest, most horrible, and most important event of our century. We live in its shadow still. Our film is about the day it began for the United States of America. Pearl Harbor, surprise and remembrance.
Japanese flash. Imperial headquarters announce a state of war with the United States.
Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced.
Remember? We all remember. Every American then alive remembers.
It was smoking for a week afterwards, and the debris in the harbor for a week afterwards. And the place looked like hell and smelled like hell, and the smoke smelled like hell. I mean, it was an absolute Dante's Inferno. Was never anything this bad.
Everyone who was there that day remembers. Wartime films recreated that Sunday morning.
And now a moment of silent prayer.
As soon as I get a neat little pile in the bank, I'm going to pull up stakes, go to Canada, spend a whole year hunting and fishing. Want to come?
When the time comes, ask me and see.
The sky was alive with planes spitting death.
We would always remember where we were and what we were doing when we heard.
The Japs are attacking Pearl Harbor.
Where's Pearl Harbor?
I don't know. I was never good at geography.
Pearl Harbor? Oh, it's down the Jersey coast near Atlantic City someplace.
They were followed by wave after wave of bombers,
Now we'll miss the
dropping their
breakthrough.
cargo of death, while in this very city, peace negotiations continue.
Not on my birthday.
I'm not quiet. And so war has come to the Western Hemisphere, with the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Gray, cold, bleak bits of land in a cold, wind-blown sea. And it was from there in November, now 50 years ago, that a huge Japanese armada with 6 big aircraft carriers started for Hawaii to destroy the American fleet anchored at Pearl Harbor. The attack came at 7:55 a.m., Sunday, December 7th, 1941, and it changed the whole course of our century. If you stand on the shores of Pearl Harbor today, in the lovely early morning light of Hawaii, you can almost see and hear the first waves of Japanese planes, dive bombers, coming in from the north. The first desperate message went out at 7:58. Air raid, Pearl Harbor. This is no drill. All of us who are old enough remember exactly where we were when we heard the news. My older brother had taken me to my first concert at Syria Mosque in Pittsburgh. I was 8 years old, and I remember nothing about the concert, only the excitement in the streets when we came out. But why had the Japanese attacked? What were the events, what were the misconceptions on both sides that led to that terrible morning? World War II was far and away the greatest, most horrible, and most important event of our century. We live in its shadow still. Our film is about the day it began for the United States of America. Pearl Harbor, surprise and remembrance.
Japanese flash. Imperial headquarters announce a state of war with the United States.
Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced.
Remember? We all remember. Every American then alive remembers.
It was smoking for a week afterwards, and the debris in the harbor for a week afterwards. And the place looked like hell and smelled like hell. And the smoke smelled like hell. I mean, it was an absolute Dante's Inferno. Was never anything this bad.
Everyone who was there that day remembers. Wartime films recreated that Sunday morning.
And now a moment of silent prayer.
As soon as I get a neat little pile in the bank, I'm going to pull up stakes, go to Canada, spend a whole year hunting and fishing. Want to come?
When the time comes, ask me and see.
The sky was alive with planes spitting death and...
We would always remember where we were and what we were doing when we heard.
The Japs are attacking Pearl Harbor.
Where's Pearl Harbor?
I don't know. I was never good at geography.
Pearl Harbor? Oh, it's down the Jersey coast near Atlantic City someplace.
They were followed by wave after wave of bombers, dropping their cargo of death, while in this very city, peace negotiations continue.
Not on my birthday.
I'm not quiet. And so war has come to the Western Hemisphere, with the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor.
The American fleet today is the most powerful on Earth. The safety of a nation, its guard on the ocean. The Navy that is to become powerful enough to guard 2 oceans.
All hands, man your battle stations.
Discipline takes each man automatically to his place, each to do his part in the fight. The Admiral on his flagship as he leads his squadron into action, the mythical battle ordered by the signals.
Throughout the 1930s, our commanders were preparing to fight, not the next war, but the last war. A war with Japan in which our battleships would steam across the Pacific and engage Japan's battleships in a great all-out battle. For that war, our fleet was ready.
Thus, with flame and thunder ends the battle at sea, the mythical enemy having been theoretically defeated and sunk.
By 1941, our Navy had expanded and modernized, but its outlook remained the same.
For many years, we have been building and maintaining this Navy. We call it our first line of defense. It has been our pride. In it are serving in the cause of patriotism, the flower of our young manhood.
The Secretary of the Navy was an old newspaper man and chum of FDR's.
I am delighted that Secretary Stimson holds such a high opinion of the Navy. Of course, I share this opinion.
Pearl Harbor, the largest and best defended American naval base, situated on the finest and safest natural harbor in the Pacific. But with its long, narrow exit to the sea, it was impossible to get out of in a hurry. A mousetrap. Around Pearl Harbor lay a great Army base. While the Navy had been growing, the Army had been neglected. There were still thousands of mules and horses in the U.S. Army, and they had just ordered 20,000 more. The Army, too, was preparing as best it could for the last war. James Jones remembered serving in Hawaii in his book, From Here to Eternity. Still, he told himself, it isn't as if you're going to spend the rest of your life in Schofield Barracks. Someday you'll be reassigned. Back to the States, he hoped. What a wild idea this had been, this going into the infantry just to do a tour in the islands. Goddamn paradise of the Pacific. Guarding the fleet against air attack required constant aerial reconnaissance through 360 degrees far out at sea. Neither the Army nor the Navy had enough planes for the job. The Army commander, General Walter C. Short, never really understood air power, and he had other things to worry about.
The danger of sabotage was paramount in my mind. Sabotage had long been considered our primary danger in Hawaii because of the large Japanese population, many of whom were under suspicion of disloyalty. About 40,000 were Japanese agents. Many of the Japanese lived in very close proximity to airfields and other defense installations.
Japanese had been coming to Hawaii in numbers since the 1890s, mostly as contract laborers. Hawaii was connected to Japan by many ties of family and culture.
My father was a Buddhist minister. He came here as a Buddhist minister and to tend to his flock. He lived in the plantation. He told me that he wanted to come to Hawaii because life was easier here than in Japan. And all the money that he made here, practically all of it, he sent back to his family in Hiroshima.
Okay, my father came to Hawaii as a Japanese school teacher. And he taught Japanese school in the Japanese community for quite some years. About a year or 2 years before the war, we knew that in the event relationship between Japan and the United States became bad, that our family would have been directly involved one way or the other. The moment we were born, we were dual citizens by law.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation.
There was another big danger the Army and Navy commanders perceived: Hawaii itself.
We had to wear our uniforms, and there was what they call locker clubs in Honolulu. And we would change, and then, of course, you'd meet the girls down at Waikiki, and the first thing they ask you is, what do you do? And if you said I was in the Navy, they couldn't go out with you because most of them were nurses. So I found if I said I worked for the government, everything worked out fine.
The Navy enlisted men ranked at the very bottom of the social scale. You couldn't find any social acceptance. So we palled together, and we did our drinking and fighting together. And as I say, some of the guys patronized the bordellos that were operated by the civilians in conjunction with the Army and Navy doctors who checked them for venereal disease every week, I think it was. So it was that kind of arrangement.
The huge fleet was hard to manage. Home was far away.
It was a terrible place. Let's face it, the paradise of the Pacific we thought was a laugh. It was for the rich.
Imagine the transition, Jonathan. You hop a clipper in San Francisco, and in less than 24 hours, you're in paradise. Silence is the endless ringing of the telephone. Gone the nerve-wracking feeling that the world in general is a whirling mess, and that America in particular can't make up its mind.
In movies made after the attack, all of Hawaii's attractions would seem full of dark implications.
When your corns begin to ache and bite, there's only one thing to do. Take your shoes off. And that's just exactly what I've done. On a flower-covered hilltop in Honolulu, TH, territory of heaven. Hawaii. Romantic, mystical Hawaii, where the air is choked with the fragrance of 1,000,000 flowers.
The armed forces dealt with the paradise effect through constant alerts and drills. Every alert was all out. If alerts are constant, alerts become routine. Routine alerts do not alert. It was impossible to imagine, while at peace, what war would be like, how unroutine it would be. After the war began, Hawaii would come to symbolize the false security we had supposedly felt behind our ocean barriers. Asleep in a dangerous world.
Sleeping peacefully, Uncle Sam? No problem? No worry? Everything in order, eh?
Oh, go away, Mr. C. I'm tired.
I'm tired, too. The whole world is tired.
Why must you plague me so? I'm tired.
Why did the Japanese go to war against the United States in 1941? Most Americans had no idea. Why were they so successful? How had we so underestimated them? In Japan, before the war, the best chance a poor boy had for glory and advancement was acceptance at the military or naval academy. Mitsuo Fuchida, the third son with few prospects, entered the Naval Academy in 1923. Japanese armed forces had made the world take notice of them. In successive wars, they had won an Asian empire for Japan. Cadets practiced for a future war with their only possible rival for control of the Pacific, the United States. Japanese strategists also expected a great all-out battle in the waters of the Central Pacific. Mitsuo Fuchida took the great battle as his final examination problem. But he also volunteered for flight training in the Infant Naval Air Corps, a choice that would eventually carry him to the sky over Pearl Harbor in 1941. Naval Academy graduates were inducted into an officer caste independent of the civil government, which they held in contempt. Henceforth, the cadets' sole duty was to the emperor and their superior officers. The Navy must be strong, they were taught, for Japan had acquired possessions in the Pacific, just as the United States and the European powers had done before them. Upon graduation, cadets made an overseas practice cruise. In 1929, the graduating class visited the mighty industrial nation that had once fostered Japan's growth. So this was the United States, the nation that now seemed determined to keep Japan a second-class power. The nation that now excluded Japanese immigrants by law from its shores. The instructor quizzed the cadets. What do you see over there? That is the Statue of Liberty, a symbol of the United States. It is the tallest statue in the world. The great Buddha of Nara in Japan is only 15 meters tall. The Statue of Liberty is much taller. But you forget, the instructor said, that the great Buddha is seated on his own legs. Until the Buddha stands up, you cannot tell which is taller. In the autumn of that year, 1929, Wall Street crashed, setting off an international depression. America threw up her tariff walls, turned in on herself, and aimed to forget the rest of the world. In the Depression years, American manufacturers accused the Japanese of dumping their cheap goods in American markets.
5,000 planes a day. Strangely enough, they're coming to America. Don't be alarmed. These are bound for toy shops as the land of cheap labor makes another bid for United States trade. May all their planes be little ones.
Though military strategists saw Japan as a growing threat, to most Americans, the Japanese were toy makers, little people, clever imitators. Americans saw Japan in a comical hurry to get out of her Madame Butterfly get-up and into this century, our century.
Well, Mr. Rogers, you're back again in Japan. You must like this country. What do you think of our new golf course?
Oh, I saw that, yeah. Well, that's the beginning of the end now. You're going in for golf, so it won't be long now till you'll be right where we are in the business supremacy of the world. If you start playing golf, you know, that'll be the end of it. That's what happened to us.
American ignorance was so deep that almost anything said about the Japanese could be believed. Americans thought all Japanese were nearsighted. Japanese males were supposed to have a poor sense of balance from being bounced on their mothers' backs as infants. They could never make good flyers. American analysts never noticed it, but Japan's aviation technology was passing the rest of the world. And it was tested in war. Throughout the 1930s, the Japanese Army was bent on incorporating China into the Japanese Empire. When the United States strongly condemned the conquest, Japan's foreign minister replied to President Roosevelt, "Japan is expanding, and what expanding country has not been trying to its neighbors? Ask the American Indian or the Mexican how excruciatingly trying the young United States used to be."
Mr. Roosevelt told me when I come over here, he says, "Now, Will, don't you go over there and jump on Japan. You just keep them from jumping on us."
Are you on one of these goodwill tours?
Now listen, boys, I ain't on any goodwill tour. That's what's the matter with our country now, sending so many people around with goodwill. I bring you no goodwill at all. I'm not here for that.
I see.
America watched appalled as the Japanese devastated China's cities. Images that would not be forgotten. When the Japanese bombed Nanking, an American gunboat, the Panay, was caught in the battle. 2 Japanese planes deliberately attacked her. American blood was shed. Just the kind of incident that starts wars. But this was 1937. America was committed to staying out of foreign wars at all costs. The American government lodged an outraged protest and threatened to break relations, but nothing more. Maybe the Japanese thought they learned something about the willingness of the United States to fight. Tokyo made reparations and promised to punish the 2 pilots responsible. They were turned over to Flight Officer Mitsuo Fuchida for discipline. They became his friends, and one, Shigeharu Murata, would fly with him in the attack on Pearl Harbor. Japan could not survive without Western trade. From 1939 on, the U.S. was trying to stop Japanese aggression in Asia by cutting off Japan's access to American raw materials. So Japan looked elsewhere for friends. Germany encouraged Japan's expansion in Asia. A German-Japanese alliance seemed only natural. But when Japan made a pact with the Nazi state, she became, in the eyes of Americans, a state of the same monstrous kind. Many Japanese believed in a coming new order in Asia, based on the natural superiority of their own race, the Yamato race. The Yamato race was a divine family, under a single divine father, the emperor. Official ideology traced the origins of the Yamato emperors back 2,600 years to the sun goddess. Whether most Japanese believed this or not, the outward display was proof to Americans. The Japanese, like the Nazis, considered themselves a master race, governed by an absolute leader. Japan's war in China dragged on without a conclusion. What Americans saw as brutal conquest, the Japanese called a crusade. Patriotic indoctrination intensified. The greatest heroes held up to children were those who had died selflessly for the emperor. Japan committed 1 million troops to the war, and they were swallowed up in the limitless Chinese land. And more were sent. The Japanese people were promised that their sacrifice and their sufferings would not be in vain. In 1939 and 1940, the Japanese watched the Nazi armies roll across Europe, gathering up the Netherlands and France, and apparently soon to defeat Britain as well. Now the European colonies in Asia were headless. The Dutch East Indies, French Indochina, British Malaya. Now was the time to free them from their European masters and incorporate them too in Japan's new order. Control of the colony's resources, rubber, oil, metals, would make Japan independent of the West forever. But the United States might well go to war to stop Japan from controlling all Asia. How could Japan win that war? Popular adventure stories had long suggested a possibility. A Japanese fleet crosses the Pacific undetected and attacks Hawaii. Any novel writer could think it up. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto made the idea a reality. Yamamoto knew that Japan could never win a prolonged war against the United States with all its limitless resources. Therefore, the American fleet must be put out of action at the start of the war by a surprise air raid on Pearl Harbor. Of course, the Americans would soon rebuild their fleet, but by that time, Japan's objectives in Asia would be achieved. Americans had no real stomach for war. The sight of their huge warships going to the bottom would prove they were up against a superior race. They might agree to make peace. Admiral Yamamoto had served as naval attaché in Washington. He knew America. He believed his plan was Japan's only chance. But a shallow-running airborne torpedo would first have to be designed, because the waters at Pearl Harbor were only 40 feet deep. A bomb would have to be developed, capable of piercing the heavy armor of American battleships. Lieutenant Commander Mitsuo Fuchida was chosen flight leader of the attack force. This business must be kept secret at all times, he was told. This is the most secret thing of all secrets.
Welcome back to the studios of Channel 56 at WTVS near Detroit. We hope that this evening you are enjoying.
Joseph Grew, a career diplomat of the old school. He'd been at Harvard with Franklin Roosevelt. Grew wrote to FDR often, explaining that the Japanese felt they had legitimate interests in Asia. The Japanese should not be pushed too hard. They would strike back. Washington paid little attention to his thoughts. Grew loved Japan and liked the Japanese. His daughter was married in Japan in 1934. 1 year later, she went to a Tokyo hospital to have her first child. Just at that time, Babe Ruth's All-Stars were playing their wildly popular series of exhibition games in Japan. Prince Tokugawa said that any nations who play baseball together would never be enemies. On Ruth's lineup was a Detroit Tigers catcher named Moe Berg. Berg spoke Japanese fluently. He carried a special letter of introduction from the State Department. One morning, Berg left his hotel room wearing a kimono and went to the hospital to call on Grew's daughter. Instead of going to her room, however, he went to the roof of the hospital, the highest building in that part of Tokyo. He took out a movie camera he had hidden under his kimono. In 1942, when the U.S. was preparing to bomb Tokyo, Moe's movies were among the few that Army intelligence had, showing the whole city from above. Just who had given Moe the camera and ordered the films remains a mystery. But it wasn't the American Embassy or Joseph Grew. The U.S. was at peace with the world in 1935 and determined to remain so. In the years that followed, American intelligence gathering intensified but never discovered the Pearl Harbor secret. As far as is known, the Japanese let slip only 2 clear warnings of an attack on Pearl Harbor, and both were overlooked. Almost a year before the attack, Ambassador Grew picked up a rumor from the Peruvian ambassador. The Japanese, in case of a break with the U.S., are planning to go all out in a surprise mass attack on Pearl Harbor. Grew reported this to Washington and added, "I rather guess that the boys in Hawaii are not precisely asleep." The State Department didn't press him to follow up. 2 months before the attack, another hint was picked up in Honolulu. We knew that the Japanese consul sent Tokyo regular reports of ship movements in Pearl Harbor, getting his information from the papers or from employees around the island. There was nothing illegal in it, and the FBI was aware of it.
In the years just before the war, my dad did some voluntary work for the Japanese consulate. One day I came home from work, and here were 3 Caucasian men walking with shoes on in the living room. You know, the Japanese have a mat on the floor. You leave your shoes outside. Well, 3 of these people have been walking in and around. My dad was all excited. My mother was pretty near in tears. And I asked, "Hey, what's going on?" She said, "Well, we FBI people, and we came in to check." I said, "Well, what did you want?" And this had occurred about a year before the war.
But in September 1941, the consul began reporting the exact positions of all ships in the harbor each week, plotted on a grid.
While the War Department G2 may not have felt bound to let me know about the routine operations of the Japanese in keeping track of our naval ships, they should certainly have let me know that the Japanese were getting reports of the exact location of the ships in Pearl Harbor, which might indicate more than just keeping track, because such details would be useful only for sabotage, for air or submarine attack in Hawaii.
By 1941, intelligence reports were flooding in from around the globe to be interpreted. No one was looking for hints of an attack on Pearl Harbor, and so no one saw them. The American military had cracked a Japanese code called Purple, an operation so brilliant it was nicknamed Magic. The armed forces had a machine that could decode and read Japan's secret instructions to its diplomats around the world. The State Department and the President got the Magic intercepts daily, but top brass was terrified that the Magic secret might get out, and access was strictly limited. Hawaii, 4,000 miles from Japan, was not on the list. Admiral Kimmel complained of this after the war, when the Magic secret could be openly discussed.
We needed one thing, which our own resources could not make available to us. That vital need was the information available in Washington from the intercepted dispatches, which told when and where Japan would probably strike. I did not get this information.
Could the Magic intercepts have alerted Hawaii that an attack was coming? No. Magic revealed only what the Japanese civilian government told its foreign embassies. And the Pearl Harbor plan was so secret that mere diplomats were never told of it. In 1941, with U.S.-Japanese relations at an all-time low, a special envoy was sent to the United States.
There are no problems between our two countries that can't be solved as among friends.
Through the summer of 1941, Ambassador Nomura held many meetings with the Secretary of State and with FDR. The U.S. read every instruction sent to him by Tokyo. Not one hinted of a planned attack on Hawaii. But all through that summer, on a northern Japanese island chosen for its resemblance to Oahu, Japanese flyers practiced their attack. America's back was, anyway, turned on the Pacific. Franklin Roosevelt was using all his immense popularity to convince Americans to face the likelihood of war, but not with Japan, with Nazi Germany. Selling arms to countries under attack by the Nazis helped end the Depression at last, which was welcome. But would American weapons be followed by American boys? Over stiff opposition, FDR got an act through Congress establishing a draft.
America stands at the crossroads of its destiny. The terrible fate of nations whose weakness invited attack is too well known to us all. We must and will prevent our land from becoming a victim of aggression.
We'd watch the Nazis roll over the states of Europe, too. Britain was likely to fall next unless America went to her side.
Swear that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the United States of America. Respond by saying, I do.
I do. In June of 1941, a bare majority of Americans was ready to fight to save Britain. This was the issue that consumed America's attention. Should we go fight the Nazis? Or could we stay out, safe behind our oceans, unless we were attacked?
New York's mayor, national head of civilian defense, is organizing civilians against possible air raids.
Here we will show you, imperfectly and crudely perhaps, because we must all learn as we go along. Remember, keep calm, keep cool, follow instructions.
Observe traffic lights. Don't become separated from your pets. And keep your head down because masses of upturned faces are conspicuous from the air. We were learning how modern war begins. In Poland, China, Spain. Modern war begins suddenly, without warning, from the air. In June, Joe DiMaggio embarked on the most spectacular hitting streak in the history of organized baseball. On June 22nd, the day Joe hit safely in his 35th straight game, the Nazi armies invaded the Soviet Union, and the Russians became our ally in the common cause against Hitler. Japan was Hitler's ally. By striking at Japan, our government could at least show America's resolve to stand up to the aggressors. The U.S. had already stopped selling Japan scrap iron, aviation fuel, cotton. We had stopped buying Japanese products.
Times being what they are, it remains for Hollywood's makeup artists to apply their talents to an all-American stocking. And with a bevy of 20th Century Fox starlets as models, and it would be nice work if you can get it.
The last shipment of Japanese silk allowed into America was used for parachutes. In August, FDR finally froze all Japanese assets in the U.S. and embargoed sales of crude oil to Japan. To the Japanese, it seemed a deliberate attempt to strangle a nation struggling for its life. The Japanese High Command now faced a crisis. The civilian government hadn't prevented the embargo. Ambassador Nomura's Washington talks were going nowhere. And soon the Japanese armed forces would run out of oil. A war cabinet took over, headed by Hideki Tojo, a general. The civilians were given until November 25th to get the oil flowing again. If they fail, Japan will execute her war plans.
Arrival at New York en route to Washington. In a dramatic attempt to avert war in the Pacific, Saburo Kurosu comes as a special envoy of the Tokyo government. In an interview, he says,
Gentlemen, you all know how difficult my mission is, but I'll do all I can to make it a successful one for the sake of two countries, Japan and the United States.
Secretary Hull takes Special Emissary Kurosu to confer with President Roosevelt. It's a headline news story, this mission to attempt a settlement. At the left...
After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the last-ditch negotiations of November seemed an obvious deception. But there's no evidence that Nomura and Special Envoy Kurosu weren't sincerely working for an agreement. On November 25th, Magic intercepted a message extending their deadline to November 29th. This time we mean it, the message read. This deadline absolutely cannot be changed. After that, things are going to happen automatically. Secretary of State Hull now guessed that Japan intended to go to war within days, probably without warning. Japan was well known for attacking without warning. The very next morning, the Japanese Pearl Harbor attack force slipped out of a secret anchorage and plowed east toward Hawaii. Yamamoto declared he would still call it back if the negotiations in Washington succeeded. They would not succeed. That same day, Hull rejected the Japanese proposals and restated America's fixed position. No oil unless Japan ceases its aggression in Asia and breaks with Hitler. The armed forces and the War Department now fully expected an attack by the Japanese. They knew it would come soon after November 29th, and they knew where. In the Philippines. Military strategists had long assumed that our remote Pacific possession would be hit first in a U.S.-Japanese war. Our commander in the Philippines, General Douglas MacArthur, was told to expect hostile action at any time, but not, repeat not, to fire the first shot. If Japan saw our forces go on the offensive now, she might guess her codes were being read. In Hawaii, General Short was likewise ordered to prepare for hostilities, but not to alarm the civilian population. Already obsessed with the idea of sabotage, he tightened security further. He drew his planes into tight clusters on the airfields so that they could be more easily guarded. Admiral Kimmel sent his aircraft carriers sailing west, ready to head for whatever trouble spot developed. Wake, Guam, or farther. No warnings from Washington mentioned any threat to his fleet, tucked up safely in Pearl Harbor. That week, Thanksgiving, newspapers and radio commentators all over America said war was likely. In a few days, a week, a month. The war we had been fearing and avoiding for so long. But nothing happened.
Here's a Japanese Sandman.
New York watched Macy's parade.
Just an old second-hand man. He'll buy your old day from you. He will take every sorrow of the day that is through, and he'll give you tomorrow just to start life anew. Then you'll be a bit older.
The president went to his vacation home in Warm Springs for Thanksgiving.
And then we proceed to do that. And then at last, we get busy and we commit murder.
Our forces in the Pacific relaxed. On December 1st, the Japanese Pearl Harbor Task Force received a coded message. Climb Mount Nikitaka. This set the attack for 0800 hours Hawaii time, December 7th. It could no longer be canceled. The Japanese made this epic movie in the first flush of victory after Pearl Harbor, when for a short time they were masters of the Pacific. It was a true story, too. How they preserved radio silence all across the cold North Pacific, keeping their fleet together by flags and blinkers. How their submarine force included 5 tiny 2-man subs to penetrate the harbor, whose crews expected to die in the attack. It was 2 a.m., December 7th, in Hawaii. In Washington, the Japanese embassy and American intelligence were reading the same message from Tokyo. It ordered the ambassador to deliver a note breaking off negotiations at exactly 1 o'clock that afternoon. Why 1 o'clock? Why Sunday and not a working day? It seems certain that the Japanese intended a strike somewhere in the world at that hour.
The dispatch fixing the hour for the delivery of the Japanese ultimatum to the United States as 1 p.m. Washington time was intercepted and decoded by the Navy Department by 7 on the morning of December 7.
If this message had been delivered to me by the most rapid possible means of communication, I would have had 4 hours, more than time enough, to fully alert the Army forces against an air raid.
This information was not supplied to me prior to the attack.
Bad weather had shut down the military radio communications that morning, and rather than discuss a magic intercept over insecure telephone lines, the Army sent the message in code via Western Union. It arrived 5 hours after the attack.
And the boys and girls are still going strong. Well, here comes George again.
All through the night, Honolulu radio broadcasts had been heard aboard the Japanese carriers. No sign that Hawaii was alert. In the Japanese film, actors took the roles of Mitsuo Fuchida and his comrades. At 0550 hours on the 7th, the attack planes headed for Hawaii, 220 miles away. Two hours later, Mitsuo Fuchida broke through the cloud cover over Oahu and looked down on the U.S. Pacific Fleet, except for the aircraft carriers. He radioed the prearranged signal back to the task force. Tora, Tora, Tora. We have achieved surprise. Under orders to type out the final note themselves, Nomura and Kurusu arrived at the State Department an hour too late. By then, Cordell Hull and the president knew, though the Japanese ambassadors did not, that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. Whether or not the attack could ever have been foreseen, or detected, or prevented, it had already entered history.
Well, that's the way it goes. One in, one out. Sam.
Yes, boss.
It's December 1941 in Casablanca. What time is it in New York?
What? My watch stopped.
I bet they're asleep in New York. I bet they're asleep all over America.
Every year, on the anniversary of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the American survivors of that attack gather to remember. For many of them, the hours of Sunday morning, December 7th, are the central event of their lives.
There she is. Yeah, but there was nothing there. I was up on a bridge drinking coffee, for Christ's sake.
They shifted all around.
No, right? See where the crane is right there? Yeah. We were right here.
I was there on that Sunday, aboard the USS Honolulu. Radioman Third Class, Jason Robards. The survivors' stories illuminate the sparse pictorial record that has survived.
And I said, Nevada's tied up.
Last one on the stand.
Right.
This is
I can name them all.
My friend, please don't lean on the table.
No picture exists at all of the first shot fired that morning. It was fired, not by the Japanese, but by the Americans, 2 hours before the planes arrived. At the narrow entrance to Pearl Harbor, an anti-submarine net was strung. On Sunday morning, though, it had been lowered to allow passage of USS Antares into the harbor.
This two-man submarine was sighted off our starboard quarter by a signalman and by one of our bosun mates.
And at the time, we didn't have any guns, and we signaled a Ward and the PBY, and they came over and actually sunk it.
On the destroyer Ward, the men of No. 3 gun fired on the conning tower of some sort of submarine. One shot scored a direct hit. It had almost given away the attack in time for us to take action. A similar tiny two-man sub was later recovered from the harbor.
Why nobody responded in Pearl Harbor, I have no idea. That's up to someone else to tell the story.
We thought it was just another false alarm, and that's the way we handled the thing. And we sat down and finished breakfast.
I'd like you to know that I can remember that breakfast as clearly as I remember what I ate this morning, if not more so. I had corned beef hash and eggs, and it was very good. I remember thinking how wonderful everything was with the world and how lucky I am to be in beautiful Hawaii. And
A flight of B-17s bound for the Philippines was due in that day from California. More than an hour before the attack, up at the other end of the island, the new radar station spotted a big flight of planes. The operators were told the planes were our own B-17s, homing in on the music from a Honolulu radio station. At that moment, Mitsuo Pachida was homing in on the same radio music.
Through the opening of the clouds, I saw Pearl Harbor glistening in the sun. God must be with us, I thought.
At Kaneohe, Eva, and Hickam, the planes were still clustered together to prevent sabotage.
Back live in the Channel 56 studio, waiting to take your pledge. If you're finding this history lesson on American experience valuable, why not show your appreciation for all the fine programming you see, not just this evening, but 365 days a year, by calling the numbers you see on the screen. And you can sit back and watch the rest of Pearl Harbor, knowing you've had something to do with making it possible. You've supplied part of the dollars, because that's what it takes, folks. It takes dollars from you to keep the programs coming into your home. If you like the programming you see, over the telephone, call one of the numbers which you see on the screen. We're waiting to take your pledge. Remember, you can charge it MasterCard or Visa. How much should you pledge? For some people, $30 is right. For some, $300. For some people, $1,000. And at $1,000, we have a nice little 5-inch GE color television set, and I'll be showing you that in just a few moments. But right now, don't put it off. Over to the telephone, make that commitment, make that call. And we'll be back with the conclusion of the Pearl Harbor American experience in just a few moments. But still plenty of time for you to get over to the telephone and get the business at hand taken care of. What's the business at hand? Making your pledge to public television.
For 126 left to go in the goal around this break. And we are relying on you to help us get to that goal. If you haven't yet gone to the phone and made a pledge of support around public television. Let me remind you, a lot of people will call and write and say, why do you have to come on the air as often as you do and ask for money? Well, when you compare the amount of time we're on the air a year, which is 0.4%, 0.4%, that compares to 16.7% of the total time that commercial television is on the air with commercials. So by comparison, we're not here very often, although I know sometimes it seems like it is. And we would like to think that it's a small price to pay, these few interruptions 3 times a year, to give you the...
There's no drill.
I flew so low that I stood up the leaves on the sugar cane. I felt the warm air of an endless summer land.
And just as I went out the side door of the ramp, Japanese torpedo plane came by going up Pearl City Channel, and I said, oh, I know exactly what it is. All I have on is a pair of shorts.
All of a sudden we looked up and looked out, and we saw these planes coming, and they were assembling at Submarine Base Tower. And you could see little black torpedoes. I say little. I've heard them called big. They were little. And you could see they were just headed directly into Battleship Row.
I saw the torpedo drop into the water and begin streaking toward the battleship, just like a dragonfly laying an egg on the water.
Suddenly there was such a movement of the ship, unlike anything that I'd ever seen before. Everybody was confused. Ships blowing horns, eerie yells, bugles blowing. Da-da-da, 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 da-da-da.
The first torpedoes struck the battleship West Virginia. The ships had no torpedo nets because torpedoes weren't supposed to work in the shallow harbor. Then the Oklahoma was hit. Hundreds were caught below when the power went out.
But the last torpedo strikes, it drives a water wedge in between the hull and the mud line, and the ship then tumbles outright over onto herself.
So
then I watched you guys walk up the side and that looked at this unsinkable ship being sunk.
We didn't know it had turned over naturally. One of the fellows had a cigarette lighter. That gives you a lot of light when it's total darkness. I said, I see something over there, and I worked my way over, and it was a aluminum dial on the telephone, upside down. I says, God centers were upside down.
415 men died on the Oklahoma. Others were trapped inside for days.
Good heavens, no wonder you're having nightmares.
Shortly after the torpedo runs had finished, Japanese come over in arrow formation of 5. They've calculated that 1 of 5, no matter what, will score a hit on a 100-foot wide battleship.
The battleship Arizona was now attacked by bombers. Nearly 1,200 men died in that moment. Hundreds more were thrown from the ship into the water.
And swimming in burning oil.
The bomb had detonated the forward ammunition magazine.
Hot air and gush is picking right out from 2 meter water. I went right up in the air over the chain.
The time was 08:05 hours, recorded on the clocks recovered from the sunken ship. At 08:05 also, a torpedo struck the California.
I was in the main top, and I remember thinking, this damn thing's going to turn over. It's going to turn turtle, like the Oklahoma had done a few minutes before. And I thought, well, I'm not going to have a very long or glorious life.
Despite the odds and their ship's unreadiness, crews were already trying to fight back.
We had awnings over all the guns. Fellows showed up from the galley with knives, cut the awnings down, threw them over the side.
Broke one of the shells out of the thing there and threw it in the breech. Let her go. Nothing happened. All the fire pins were down in the arm.
We had 2 machine guns up forward, supposedly ready to fire at any time. And one of them was malfunctioning, wouldn't fire automatic, it would fire a round at a time like a rifle. And I thought, that is disgraceful.
The anti-aircraft fire from the ships was quicker and more fierce than we expected. We did not mind. It stirred us up.
He had been strafing over on the starboard side, and his gunner was bringing it up to drop down on top of us. And I can see those twin 30s coming down, and then I said load, which an automatic gun fired. Now he disintegrated.
Black burst was spoiling the once beautiful sky. It was not systematic. It was random, to get rid of fear.
Ground crews tried their best to get planes aloft.
Every time we would try to fill one up with gasoline and arm the guns on it and get it ready for a pilot to take off, they'd fly over and shoot it up.
And we're picking up chunks of concrete and throwing them at these planes that are coming in so low, like 20 feet up. If we ever hit any, I don't know.
Marines at Eva Airfield brought down a Zero with small arms fire and hit another. These pilots got their planes in the air amid Japanese strafing and shot some down. At 08:30 hours, just 40 minutes after the first bombs dropped, the attackers disappeared to the north.
The big thing that I remember was taking care of the burn patients.
Wounded and dying men were arriving at Honolulu Hospital.
I was 72 hours before I got to get in my own bunk and take a shower.
By that time, we were getting all the casualties.
Oh, all I know is I was frightened.
Yes, most of them, without legs and arms and very, very young boys. These were all such young boys.
By now, the oil from torpedoed ships coating the water of the harbor was on fire.
And you'd see sailors in the water breaking the oil and going under, and breaking the oil, coming up to breathe and going under.
Tried to get aboard the Maryland, pushed underwater, start up again, pushed underwater again. This guy's going on my back trying to get up there, and I decided no more.
The next hour and a half, I spent pulling survivors and others out of the water from the battleships. Probably 1 out of 3 that we pulled out of the water was still alive.
that I lost track of time. The destruction of the ship seemed to happen very rapidly. The attack as it unfolded seemed to take a long time. The planes never seemed to go away.
At 0854 hours, the second wave of Japanese bombers arrived. These were less well-trained pilots searching for targets not sunk by the first wave. They went for the destroyers, the Cassin and the Downs. The Shaw, her magazines were set off by a bomb. The only battleship not yet sunk or put out of commission was Nevada. At 0850, the crew managed to get her underway and headed out to sea.
We just let out a general yell. We felt that we were going to clear the entrance and get out to open sea.
And she went right by my ship. And when the Japanese saw this battleship heading seaward, they went after her. And they bombed her and strafed her and everything else. She started to sink.
To avoid blocking the channel when she sank, Nevada was deliberately run aground.
Everybody was saying, abandon ship, abandon ship, abandon ship. That's when I jumped over the side and began swimming to Ford Island.
The city of Honolulu has also been attacked and considerable damage is done.
Frankly, tell you, nobody told me we were at war. It didn't dawn on a lot of people that a war was beginning.
Much of the damage done in the city was done by our own ship's guns, firing wildly.
We're shaking like leaves, all of us.
I wish I'd have stayed at home, I can tell you.
The attackers finally turned north toward their carriers at 0925 hours. In 1 hour and 45 minutes, they had sunk or damaged 18 American warships, including 8 battleships, and destroyed over 140 planes. The Japanese lost 29 planes. Back on his carrier, Mitsuo Fuchida argued for a third attack wave. The oil tanks, the docks, and the warehouses at Pearl could have been destroyed if his commander had listened. The admiral chose not to take the risk. Our aircraft carriers had avoided the attack. At dusk, USS Enterprise, returning to Hawaii, sent her fighters on ahead to Pearl.
Everything was jittery. The whole island erupted. We thought there was another Japanese invasion. All our 90mm men, it was like the 4th of July display over there.
That night was a ferocious night to be around, because all the Marines were just trigger happy as the devil. I don't know how many were killed that didn't correctly respond to their charges.
The next morning, martial law was declared in the territory of Hawaii. Rumors were rife. Hawaiian Japanese were supposed to have poisoned the drinking water, jammed the radio, and guided in the attacking planes. The military commanders believed this too. They were wrong. No evidence of sabotage or treachery on the part of the Japanese population has ever appeared.
See, my dad was considered a prisoner of war. He was picked up that very night. On December 7th, they came in while he was in kimono and took him away in kimono.
In the first newsreels after the attack, we were shown nothing. The government had seized all films and photos of the event.
Frontmen in Tokyo's drama of treachery, Nomura and Kurusu.
Instead, we saw scenes from last week's newsreel, with a different meaning now.
Their protestations are ever so peaceful. Their oily smiles, their continual pleas for more time, have served their purpose.
Their treachery, now obvious. Our negligent commanders, now fired. Something had to account for the total success of the attack. We would not attribute it to Japanese planning, or advanced Japanese weaponry, or Japanese skill. For a long time, reports of the damage would be carefully managed.
Secretary of the Navy Knox reports to the nation on Pearl Harbor.
The Navy lost the battleship Arizona, the old target ship Utah, 3 destroyers, the Cassin, the Downs, and the Shaw. And the Navy sustained damage to other vessels. The entire balance of the Pacific Fleet, with its battleships, aircraft carriers, heavy cruisers, light cruisers, destroyers, and submarines are uninjured and all are at sea seeking contact with the enemy.
The message directed to our hearts was ambivalent. They really killed us, but they didn't really hurt us.
The report that we lost more than 1,000 airplanes at Pearl Harbor is as baseless as other weird rumors. The Japanese do not know just how many planes they destroyed that day, and I am not going to tell them.
The Japs started this war. We are going to finish it.
Knox sent Admiral Chester Nimitz to take over the Pacific Fleet, untainted by the disaster, the newsreel image of a hero. America needed heroes. 13 Congressional Medals of Honor were awarded for heroism on December 7th, 50 Navy Crosses, 69 Silver Stars, and many other decorations. When medals had been given to everyone who had done anything right, medals were given to those who had done nothing wrong.
On the morning of December the 7th, I was on duty when I discovered a large flight of planes about 130 miles away. This flight I reported to my duty officer. They later turned out to be Japanese planes. That's all I know about it.
I was going along the starboard rail, and Admiral Furlong was standing there, and he was staring at all this carnage and tremendous ruin. I said, Admiral, you shouldn't stay there. You're going to get hurt, and we're going to need you tomorrow. I had never even talked to a captain, never mind an admiral. So about 4 days later, he looked at me when I walked in. He turned to the other officer. He says, there's the fella. That's the guy that brought me back to my senses. He says, and I want to thank you, Feldman. And I didn't want to tell him my name was Goldfarb, and we all looked alike. And I got to believe somewhere there's a guy by the name of Feldman walking around the Navy Cross, and that's the story of my life.
John Ford, Hollywood's great director, went out to Hawaii to see if he could make the Pearl Harbor story vivid to Americans. Ford had volunteered his services to the Office of War Information and had been waiting for something substantial to do. He planned to recreate the attack in Technicolor, with all the vividness of Atlanta burning and gone with the wind. But building ships and blowing them up in color perhaps seemed a little Hollywood, a little unserious. Ford switched to black and white and began again. Ford's epic film was first screened for Armed Forces censors.
Your War and Navy departments present December 7th.
How was it that we had been taken by surprise? Because trusting, innocent Uncle Sam had ignored every warning.
Watch out, U.S. No matter the hour, no matter the place, there's an ear to hear and an eye to observe.
In Ford's film, the Hawaiian Japanese were to blame. It was what most people believed.
Tell me these new cruisers will do 35.
Patiently, bit by bit, information is collected. The ever-present diesel-powered sampan is used for other purposes besides fishing.
But these scenes were never shown publicly. The military didn't like them. It wasn't helpful, they said, to fret about just why the armed forces had been caught with their pants down. That was history. There was a war to win.
Early Sunday morning, on the island of Oahu.
What we needed were heroic images to carry us through years of brutal war. Almost no actual movies of the attack existed, so John Ford and his actors and his cameramen invented them. The scenes were so vivid and so widely shown that to this day, many people believe them to be real.
On they came. At 7:55 a.m., hell broke loose. Man-made hell, made
movie won an Academy Award in 1943. Everyone then alive remembers how Pearl Harbor united the country with a sense of righteous anger. We didn't have to make the hard decision for war. The Japanese made it for us.
Let's remember Pearl Harbor as we go to meet the foe. Let's remember Pearl Harbor as we did the Alamo. We will always remember.
War vastly expanded our government and its presence in our lives. Not temporarily, as we thought then, but for good.
Go on to victory.
Americans who experienced Pearl Harbor carried an unforgettable lesson into the post-war world. War comes suddenly, by surprise, from far away. They would forever believe that if America's defenses weren't ready, it would happen again. Immediately after Pearl Harbor, FDR's advisors urged him to declare war on Germany too. He wouldn't do it. But 4 days after the attack, Hitler joined the Japanese and declared war on the United States. This was the war we had been expecting to fight all along. We hated the Nazis, but we felt a special loathing for all Japanese. The people we had once dismissed as little people, nearsighted toy makers.
I know by long experience of the overweening ambition of that Japanese military machine, of its great strength and power, of the intensiveness of its training over long years for any kind of fighting, of its fanatical determination. I know what it aims to do to these United States, and I realize all too vividly what will happen if that enemy ever secures a foothold on our own sacred shores.
Japanese evacuated from strategic West Coast areas show little apparent regret. They seem relieved, and some say it's like a holiday.
Our anger and repugnance extended to our own citizens. Thousands of Japanese Americans were stripped of their civil and human rights and sent off to internment camps. The war between Japan and the United States wasn't a race war. The issues were those of most wars: power, security, access to resources. But racial antagonisms gave it a special bitterness, a rancor that would last for years.
In 1966, we had our 25th reunion in Hawaii. And Captain Mitsuo Fushida, who was the Japanese pilot that led the attack on Pearl Harbor, appeared. He wanted to join our association at that time. He had all the qualifications, but except one, he was on the wrong side. So we rejected his membership. However, at that time, he was an ordained Protestant minister, and he lived at that time in Tacoma, Washington. And in lieu of his membership, he donated this Bible to us, and he refers to Luke 23:34, which pertains to forgiveness.
You've heard of Fushida. Great friend of Billy Graham's. And Fushida, who led the attack, is a Christian who has talked to us here at our Christian meeting. I'm doing a film with the Japanese now, and they're bringing a lady from Hiroshima who has no arms and no legs, and they know the end of my back went that morning at Pearl, and they're going to put all of us together, and they say, okay, we hit you first, and then you hit us with the atomic bomb. Now we're all even, bow our heads, and may Jesus Christ give us peace.
In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you.
Those men who were assigned to USS Arizona and who survived the attack can ask to have their ashes placed within the hulk of the ship, which still lies in the harbor waters just beneath this memorial.
I am the way, and the truth and the light.
If I saw the people that plotted this attack today, I probably would try to kill them with my bare hands. But if you want me to hate their grandchildren, I can't.
And they refer to Japanese Americans as your people started the war. My people didn't start the war. I'm an American.
I'm married to a Nisei, second-generation Japanese lady. If anybody had told me at 8:30, Sunday, December 7th, 1941, I was going to marry her, I'd have told them they were crazy. But, you know, things change.
Pearl Harbor burned itself into the American soul. For 50 years, it has gone on raising questions that will not go away. Who finally was to blame? A disaster so great has seemed to require a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of power. Could Franklin Roosevelt have known in advance that the Japanese intended to attack Pearl Harbor and allowed it to happen so that America would join the war? No indisputable evidence of this has ever appeared, yet many believe it to this day. Admiral Kimmel believed it. When news reached him of his son's death in the war, he said, "Now that son of a bitch has killed my son." It may be easier to search for conspirators than to accept the fact that there was no one finally to blame. That historical events, even the most terrible, have no single cause and no single meaning. How shall we remember Pearl Harbor now? How shall we remember all those whose futures were taken from them? Until we can remember the disasters of our past with understanding, with mercy, and without rancor, we have not earned the right, finally, to forget.
Make that pledge. Now's the time, folks. If you've been fascinated by the last 2 hours, the American experience, Pearl Harbor, now's the time to show your appreciation for this kind of programming by going over to your telephone, dialing the numbers you see on the screen, and say, yes, Channel 56 is important to me and my family. If it is indeed important, you have to show it is with your telephone call and your pledge of the dollars that keeps Channel 56 coming into your home day after day, week after week. You can tell by the list of credits rolling by that it takes a lot of people to put together a television program, a documentary like this. So therefore, television is an expensive business. And in public television, where do the dollars come from? They come from you, the viewer. So if you appreciated tonight's presentation, over to the telephone and make that call. How much should you pledge? Maybe $30 or $120. You know, $120 is just $10 a month, and you could use the monthly installment plan, or you could charge a pledge on your MasterCard or Visa, and that puts the dollars to work immediately for us here at Channel 56. But whatever way is right for you and whatever amount is right for you, over to the telephone, make that call, make that commitment. It's never going to be any easier than it is right now. We have a studio full of volunteers, and they're here for just one purpose, and that purpose is to take your pledge. So if you're assuming someone else is going to do it, you don't assume that, folks. It's each and every one doing their fair share. That's what keeps public television coming into your home. You know, sit down and analyze how many hours a week of enjoyment you get out of Channel 56. Maybe you have a little one that watches Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers, 321 Contact, or Club Connect, or any of the other children's programming. Maybe you like the documentaries on Monday and Tuesday night. If you do, show your appreciation with your call.
Local
local broadcast of the American Experience is made possible by Federal Mogul Corporation, a worldwide manufacturer and distributor of precision parts.